like people are joining now.
Oh boy. I had four of these on Thursday.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
All right, as people are still coming in, so let's give it a second or two as people get into the room here with us.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner, it looks like everybody, I'm not getting new people coming in, so I bet we could get going.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. John Kefalas, Larimer County Commissioner, District 1. I'd like to do this Fort Collins LaPorte virtual community conversation a little bit differently. And rather than me going into updates, for 10 minutes or so in the beginning, I'd like to give you all an opportunity to check in personally, professionally, and maybe how your businesses are doing now that we're into this public health situation for about 100 days. So I will be very brief, and I really want to put on listening mode and allow you a chance to check in, let us know how you're doing, and then of course I'll respond to your questions as best as I can, including if there are particular things that you're interested in as far as updates. So I will stop there. I will turn it over to Michelle, who will explain a little bit about how we do this and how folks can ask questions or provide input. We did receive a couple of questions ahead of time, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. For those of you that I have not met in person, my name is Michelle Bird. I'm the Public Affairs Director at Larimer County. I'm going to be your Zoom host today for Commissioner Kefalas' meeting. And just a few things for you guys so that we can all interact easily with each other. For those of you that have been on Zoom meetings before, you'll notice that this might look a little bit different than what you're used to. That's because we are in webinar mode. And webinar mode is really just more of a security issue than anything. I'm sure you've heard about Zoom bombings and people coming into Zoom meetings and doing not nice things on the meeting. And so webinar mode, what it does is it doesn't allow participants to share their screen or have video on. And it also requires that one of the panelists, so John or I, and it'll be me today, to press a little button to allow you to talk. That way someone can't come on and just say terrible things during the meeting that nobody wants to hear. So that's kind of how it's going to go today. We have a couple different options. Commissioner Kefalas said he wanted to listen today, so we're going to jump right into questions. You have a couple different opportunities or different ways that you can ask questions. The first one is below, kind of on the bottom of your screen. If you're on the computer, you'll see that there's a Q&A section. You can go ahead in there and type in your question if you would like, and then we will read it and answer it in the meeting here if we can. The second way you can do it if you're on the computer is you can click the raise your hand function to raise your hand, and then I'll unmute you and you can go ahead and talk. If you're on the phone, hello, if you're on the phone, we might have a few people on the phone today. The way you raise your hand is hit *9, and that'll indicate to me that you have your hand raised, and then I will go ahead and allow you to talk, and hopefully we'll get talking. So we did, as Commissioner Kefalas said, we had a few people email in questions earlier, and I'm looking to see if those people are on here with us. I don't see Rosemary on here, Commissioner. Do you want to wait till she is on here and go to the next question? Because I do see Hal here.
Yeah, sure, that's fine, Michelle. Thank you.
Of course. So Hal Braden emailed in some questions to Commissioner Kefalas before the meeting. And so let's see, the three questions, issues that how, do you want me to do them one at a time, Commissioner?
Yes, yeah, yes, please.
So County Road 44H, just what's the status? Are there repairs happening? Maybe just a little bit of an update on County Road 44H.
Well, the update that I would offer, since I can get more details, Hal, and thanks for your question. I don't think anything has really changed in terms of receiving the FEMA funds to be able to move forward. The legislature, which is winding down today, tomorrow, or Monday, perhaps, in their long bill, the budget bill, they did put in some of the state's responsibility in some of these disaster projects, from the flood, and they did include their portion of the funding. When we get FEMA money, I think that at 75% of the costs, 12.5% comes from the county and 12.5% comes from the state. So those monies have been put in the budget, the state budget, and I think we're still waiting on the federal dollars, and I would need to find out how, have you seen any activity going on over there?
Hey, Hal, I think I can allow you to talk. So hold on just a second. And Hal, you might have to hit, if you're on the phone, you might have to hit *6 to unmute yourself. You there, Hal? *6 to unmute yourself if you're on the phone. Oh, it looks like he's saying he's going to have to do it on the Q&A, Commissioner.
Oh, okay.
He must not be on the phone.
Okay, but he realizes that we're basically in Q&A throughout the meeting. I'm not sure what Hal is referring
I don't think he can. I don't think he can get on the phone, or I don't think he's able to use his mic. So he's going to type up in the Q&A.
I see. Okay, very good.
Yeah.
And any questions that I can't adequately answer, we'll certainly follow up. And I know there's a question that Hal emailed me a while back, and I haven't been able to respond to him. So please know that I'll certainly follow up promptly on questions that I can't answer.
All right. So Hal's next question had to do with the land use code. It just said land use code discussion.
Okay. So I think folks are aware that we are in the sort of the first phase of updating the Larimer County Land Use Code. Folks are aware that last year in July, we approved the updated comprehensive plan, the master plan, and the land use code is built off of that comprehensive plan. We have basically completed stages 1 and 2 of the land use code update process, and step one deals with administrative procedures and procedures. Step 2 is which we discussed recently, is dealing with zoning districts and land uses. So that is proceeding, working closely with the consultants, and there are opportunities for folks to provide input. The link, if you're not aware, if you go to larimer.org/LUC 2020, you can see the timeline and the different steps that we've gone through so far, and how you can provide input into the land use code process, the update.
Commissioner, not to change the subject back, but it looked like Hal did say that they're hoping that there's construction already started on 44H. And then Randy Ross was asking what intersection Hal is asking about.
Um, well, 44H is Buckhorn Road, and there was extensive damage done on that road in relation to the 2013 flood and subsequent to that. And we have been, I mean, that's one of the outstanding projects that still needs to be completed to do the road improvements. And also there are some issues related to drainage or culverts. And it's been tricky for lots of reasons, because we've had to ensure that the design standards that we've put in place, to improve this road comply with everything from the U.S. Forest Service and some of their requirements, and certainly FEMA. So that's where things are at. That hopefully that responds to the question about crossroads, but it is the Buckhorn Road. And a while back, I was looking at a videotape that somebody took when the floods were occurring in September of 2013, and it's just pretty incredible. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. And then to go back to Hal's original questions,
Yes.
the last one is regards to the Sheriff's Department, and what is the Sheriff's Department role?
Hal, on that question, I need to look up your email, your most recent email. If it's satisfactory to you, I will commit that I will respond to your email shortly after this community conversation, and do whatever follow-up is needed with the Sheriff's Office. If you're able to, either through the chat or speak to us, you could remind me specifically what your question relates to as far as the Sheriff's role. But I commit to getting back to you later this morning.
Great. Jumping back one more time
Yes.
to the land use code discussion. Hal had a comment that says the current code allows up to 10 cattle per acre.
Yep.
A problem though, no fencing is necessary, so one could have over 400 animals even if there is no fencing. So there wasn't really a question there, but definitely a statement.
Well, and I know Hal has brought this up. There's a particular property that he's shared concerns. We've had the code compliance people interact with him, as well as the property owners that have those animals. I think the one course of action, Hal, if you haven't done this already, is to provide that specific input in terms of the updating of the land use code, because we are looking at changes in terms of agricultural and ranching operations. So I really encourage you to provide that input.
Hal just said he's going to do that. So
how do you know that? Is he doing that through the chat?
it's through the question and answer section.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So Commissioner, it looks like Rosemary is on, so let's go to her questions.
Okay.
So Rosemary said she would appreciate any report on COVID testing in the county jail. Has anyone been testing? What were those results? Were they confirmed or preventive? How many vulnerable inmates, and what steps have been taken to reduce the exposure besides isolation?
Thank you, Rosemary, and hopefully you can hear me. So based on your questions, I asked Michelle to follow up with the Sheriff's Office, and yesterday we received the following response from Lieutenant Schaefer, who's out there at the jail, and it reads as follows. We have tested 13 inmates, all are negative results, COVID-19 results. As of yesterday, the count as far as folks that are incarcerated at the Larimer County Detention Center is 393, which is definitely below what the capacity is of the jail at this time. One of her questions related to inmates that might be more susceptible. Lieutenant Schaefer responded, we count every inmate as vulnerable to COVID. We have taken the following steps to reduce exposure. All new inmates without symptoms are quarantined presumptively for 14 days as a revolving cohort. Any inmate with symptoms similar to COVID-19 is isolated until the symptoms resolve and testing occurs. Any inmate without symptoms but suggests a potential exposure to COVID-19 is quarantined separately for 14 days. All employees and visitors engage in screening prior to entering the jail. It's a combination of self-screening and medical screening depending on the role of the person. Educational material is provided to each inmate on COVID-19. Frequent hand washing, sanitizing is encouraged. 2 masks, protective face coverings are provided to each inmate, 1 to wash and 1 to wear. Replacement masks are abundantly available. And finally, it's kind of interesting. Apparently, she has been teaching inmates how to sew. And I guess they've undertaken a project to sew masks. And these masks are being made available to the community corrections and to Summit Stone. So that is my response to the questions that you posed, Rosemary. I don't know if there's any follow-up.
I will let you know.
I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I'll let you know if Rosemary follows up. And Hal just had a random question or a random comment about COVID. So he wanted to know, or he basically was saying it's a crapshoot if people are gonna get COVID or not. So I'm just gonna put that in the answered. And if I hear anything more from Rosemary, I'll let you know, Commissioner, so we can follow up. We do have some other questions. So this question is from Jody. Oh, Rosemary did say, excellent, thank you. Thanks, Rosemary. Glad you could join us.
You're welcome, Rosemary, yes.
So Judy, I'm sorry, it's Judy. Judy asks, we understand that the rules for social distancing and mask wearing are different between Larimer County and Fort Collins. How is that working?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that when there is a difference in terms of public health protocols, for example, there are some differences between what Fort Collins, the city of Fort Collins has established, and the county. The more stringent protocols apply. So, for example, on the protective face coverings or the masks, the county public health order, where we also did a variation on that, and we certainly received feedback on that. But the idea is that if you are entering into a business or some other place where people are located, you are required to wear a face mask. What we've changed, what the county has changed, and this would apply in all the unincorporated areas, such as LaPorte, for example. But what we've changed to say is that the business owner is not required to turn someone away, because we know that can be problematic. But if the business owner can provide that we have a business checklist, but specific things that he or she is doing to make sure that someone entering their store they're following public health protocols exclusive of the mask wearing, then that is generally approved. So that's my response to the question, that the more stringent guidance or requirements applies. And in this case, it would be the city of Fort Collins. But in the county, there's a little bit more flexibility. And that's kind of the principle behind when the county submitted its waiver or variance request to the state, back towards the end of May. And we identified 12 areas, a lot of it business related, in terms of what we were asking for greater flexibility and more local control. Many of those variances were granted. And since then, things are changing every day. But our goal has always been to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And accelerate the pace at which we're getting folks back to work and helping businesses to reopen. I hope that's an adequate response to the question.
All right. Next question is from Jim. Jim asks, do you have any update on the status of the traffic signal at State Highway 1 and Douglas Road? Thank you.
You're welcome, Jim. And I actually do have an update, and it's pretty matter of fact. So we're talking about Highway 1, Douglas Road, obviously the road up to Wellington and Terry Lake Road. And the original timeline was to install a traffic light at that intersection because it's a very dangerous intersection. And that was going to occur this summer, summer of 2020. Because of some delays, particularly the traffic signal pole or post, it's steel. And this happened, similar issue happened with the Wellington, the I-25 Wellington exit traffic signals that were installed there. There's a delay in getting the steel poles. And so the project is being pushed back to the fall. But the goal is to complete that traffic signal this fall once the materials are received. And also CDOT is requiring that we put out an RFP for the work, which normally a project of this scale, we would go to the contractors that we have a history with. So those two things are causing it to be pushed back to start it this fall and to complete it this fall.
Great. So currently we have answered all the questions and I don't see anybody with their hands up. So just a reminder to everybody, if you want to ask a question live, oh, we did get a question, but let me finish my instructions. If you want to ask a question live, you can just raise your hand and I'll give you permissions to talk. Or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9 and that'll let me know that you're looking to talk. But it looks like we have a question from Alan. Hello, John and Michelle. Hello, Alan.
Hi, Alan.
The intersection remains quite dangerous. Can anything be done in the meantime?
And I assume that the intersection Alan is referring to is the intersection of Douglas Road and Highway 1. Is that correct, Alan?
Here, Alan, I'm going to see if I can unmute you if you want to talk. So you might have to, I gave you permissions to talk. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Yes, of course. Hello. Yes, of course, it remains intersection. Highway 1 and Douglas Road is very dangerous, and we have to wait until there are some more serious accidents, or can something be done in the meantime if there's delays on the project for the signalization?
Thank you, Alan. And I know that you are an avid bicyclist, and of course I can understand your concern. But even, trucks are making turns on that intersection. Visibility is not great. I mean, absolutely. To answer your question, I can follow up with our county engineer, Mark Peterson, to see if there are plans for putting some things in place temporarily that might help address the traffic safety or the public safety issue. I would also add, Alan and folks who are listening, that I'm pleased that it took a while, but if you'll notice at another really tricky intersection, and that is at the Y, there adjacent to Poudre Valley Mobile Home Park, working with the city and working with the state, we've been successful in putting in left turn signals, both coming from the north, from LaPorte, and coming from Fort Collins, North College Avenue. And that, I think, has gone a long way to improving safety, so folks can turn left into Poudre Valley Mobile Home Park, or perhaps folks coming from the north can turn left and get back, get on Highway 1. But Alan, I'll follow up with Mark Peterson to see if there are plans to put some things temporarily in place.
It looks like Hal has, thank you, Alan. It looks like Hal has a suggestion or maybe a question. Would a four-way stop work there?
Duly noted, Hal. and I will ask. I'm not a traffic engineer. So I think that I appreciate offering a constructive suggestion. And does anyone know off the top of their head? I mean, I know there are stop signs, but I see there's no stop sign, of course, on coming down Highway 1. There are stop signs going in either direction on Douglas. So I can certainly ask that question or pose that as a suggestion. Thank you, Hal. And Hal, I definitely owe you a bunch of apologies for not being as responsive to some of your emails, and I'll get on that this morning.
All right, Commissioner. Oh, it looks like Jim Miles has his hand raised. So Jim, what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow you to talk, and then you're going to have to unmute yourself. There you go.
I think that worked. Good morning, Commissioner. Jim Miles here.
Hello, Jim. Hi.
I'm just curious. The governor's been on the airwaves talking about the increase in the case rates in both the state of Arizona and in Utah.
Yes.
Fortunately, we here in Colorado have not seen a similar incidences or rise so far, at least,
Yes.
of the disease. I'm curious specifically about Larimer County, though. It's a little difficult for me to sort through all the data that comes and goes here to understand how really are we doing in Larimer County with respect to the surrounding metro Denver area, and what's Director Gonzalez's prognostication, if you know it, about the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And it's a complex question with complex answers, but I can try to be succinct here. So first of all, in Larimer County, since we went from stay at home to safer at home, and even with the variances that we've been granted and how we are starting to, if you go to Old Town Fort Collins, for example, it's like in the good old days, I suppose. It's hard to find a parking space. So because of the data that we have, the county is feeling very confident that we can take these measures to get folks back to work, et cetera. In terms of, there is a website, and I think you must be aware of it. And I know sometimes the data can be confusing. I looked at it this morning, and for example, it talks about 628 cases, but now we've broken out the cases to confirmed, probable, and suspect. So suspect cases are about 200, and suspect cases are people that have received, as I understand it, Michelle can help me out because she's doing a lot of work in the Emergency Operations Center, but suspected cases are folks who have received an antibody test and they're asymptomatic, and because it takes time for these antibodies to show up in your system, my understanding is that those people, while they're suspected cases, they don't pose a greater risk of spreading the novel coronavirus. So in terms of new cases, thanks, Michelle. In terms of new cases, the numbers are really low. In terms of infection rate, the total number of people that have been tested and how many folks are testing positive, the last time I looked, we were at about 7% infection rate. So the number of new cases, the prevalence and the incidence of COVID-19 in Larimer County continues to be very stable and continues to be very low. Along with that, Jim and others, what's really critical to look at, because the whole idea of containing this thing, or a big part of it, is we know there will be more cases. We know there's potential in the fall for some type of escalation in the number of cases or a surge, and we have to be very mindful of that and be prepared for that. But the issue of hospitalizations and also accessing ICU beds, if you look at the numbers, in terms of new admissions and how many folks are in the region, in the four main hospitals across Weld and Larimer County, it's really down low. I mean, we're at, I don't know, the last time I looked, maybe Michelle can tell us, but that's another important indicator that the capacity that we have is more than adequate to deal with the number of folks that are being hospitalized, the folks that are being discharged, and certainly more severe cases, where folks are having to be intubated, on ventilators and in ICU. So all of those things give us greater confidence to move in the direction that we're moving. At the same time, Tom Gonzalez, he likes to say, yes, we've had great success in flattening the curve, but the curve never goes away, or something like that. And I think he's right. And, anecdotally, when you go out and about, I still wear a face mask. When I'm riding my bicycle, for example, and I'm not near anybody, I'll pull it down, or if I'm running, the same thing. But otherwise, when I go into the courthouse, which is now open, when I go into a business, I wear the protective face covering, and when we're out in public. But when we're not close to folks, I do pull it down, and that's an adjustment that I've made personally. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but overall, we've had great success in flattening the curve in Larimer County. I know there's different opinions about all of that, but a lot of that has to do with, the separation, the physical distancing, which is really, really important. Making sure that folks that are more susceptible or more at risk, older adults, for example, people with pre-existing conditions like diabetes, like respiratory diseases, those kinds of things. Those are the folks that are more susceptible to being infected with the virus. I'll stop there. Michelle, if you want to add anything, or Jim, if you have a follow-up.
I was just going to say, I don't know hospital numbers off the top of my head, but I know I heard them yesterday and they were very, very low. And I know the last 3 days, we've only reported 1 new coronavirus positive test in the county.
Yeah.
Numbers are very low right now.
And I think that hospitalization rate, Jim and others, also applies to the state. Clearly there are new, folks are testing positive, but the numbers are lower, and the hospitalizations are lower, and all of those are positive signs. It's really hard because this is very new. This virus is very unique in terms of if you're infected, there's a lag time before it's detected and the testing occurs, and then if you require some kind of medical attention, all of that allows for the potential for spreading. And so Colorado, Larimer County, overall, we're doing well, but we're not going to be out of the woods, frankly. We're going to have to be very vigilant, certainly through this year, but we are looking to, make sure that folks can get back. We are looking at, sort of, for example, the 4th of July, July 4th celebrations, where, we are looking at, I know it sounds weird, but, drive-in fireworks displays where folks could view fireworks, from their automobiles, for example. So we are doing all of those kinds of things. And one last thing I'll mention is there's this term called and Michelle, you're going to have to help me with this one, the R naught value, the R naught, NAUGHT value. And ours is below 1. And that has to do with the potential for, if someone is infected, if it's up to like 1.5, it means that they have the potential to, spread the virus to, 1.5 folks over a period of time. Being below 1 is an example of an indicator. If ours bumped up to 1.5 or 2, that would tell us something. If hospitalization started to increase, we have all these indicators in place, and our emergency management folks and working closely with public health and the hospitals, we're monitoring this all the time. And if certain things happen, it would indicate an adjustment to our course of action.
All right, Jim, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. It looks like, Commissioner, we have a question from Alan Miller. Hi, Alan.
Hey,
Alan is hoping for an update on the Loveland Ready Mix in LaPorte and Glade/NISP. So 2 different things.
Well, first of all, And it's regarding the LaPorte sand and gravel situation. I think you know, Alan, that there was a recent ruling by the judge. It's in the legal process, and therefore I need to be very cautious about talking about it. So I think that in light of the recent decision by the judge, there was a story about it, I think, in the Coloradoan or the online version today, or possibly the North 40 News. I really can't get into the details. I know there are discussions happening in terms of, you know, what happens now. That's what I can say about the lawsuit and the that was filed by the the group no LaPorte Gravel, the group out of the advocacy group out of LaPorte. Regarding the NISP, Northern Integrated Supply Project, Glade Reservoir, I think Alan and folks know that Northern Colorado Water Conservancy Districts, you know, filed a 1041 permit application, and because it's a 1041 permit process, once again, I really can't talk much about it, but I can say, if you go to the website, the Larimer.org/planning, I suppose, and then there's a link to NISP. You'll see the 1,000-page application. I know people are reviewing that very carefully. You know, we've been getting a variety of emails that are all part of the public record. But it'll also tell you the schedule that has been adopted in terms of the next couple of months related to this. And June 24th, which is coming up sooner than later, is when the Planning Commission will convene and receive information from our planning folks on the application. That won't be, as I understand it, that won't be an opportunity for public comment or public testimony, although you can do that throughout this process. But then the next Planning Commission meeting, which I think is right after the 4th of July, perhaps July 8th, that's when, you know, folks will have an opportunity in person and or through this lovely platform that we're all just really loving, you know, to offer testimony. There are a number of dates set up for the Planning Commission. Ultimately, they will make some decision. And then in August, we have scheduled at least 3 dates or maybe more hearing dates where the commissioners, you know, we would receive the information, and we're allowing for, you know, a robust amount of time overall, you know, for people to provide public testimony. That's what I can say about that, Alan.
And Commissioner, I just wanted to reiterate what you said. So there is a registration form to sign up and testify at the hearing on July 8th. And if you go to larimer.org/planning, you'll find a link to NISP and ISP, and you can find that registration there. And that's going to be available. It's not available yet. So June 17th is when that'll become available. And then, as you said, presentations actually start on June 24th. So the public testimony part will be on July 8th. People need to sign up for that, but presentations do start on June 24th.
Michelle, in looking at the site, do they have the schedule that I just attempted to outline?
Correct. Yes, they do have the schedule.
And Alan and others, the last thing I can say on this, I think, is that I suppose things could change, but at this point, the plan is to make some kind of a decision by around Labor Day.
Alan says, thanks for the information. Thanks for the question, Alan.
You're welcome, Alan.
All right, looks like we have another question from Rosemary. So Rosemary asks, the county contracts with the sheriff to provide inmates transportation to criminal court hearings, however, not for civil court cases. This affects one's right to be present and participate in their defense, most importantly in child welfare cases.
Yep.
One solution is to provide phone-in participation, but it is not guaranteed. Commissioners need to formalize the expectation that a phone is provided at very least. Thank you. So it wasn't really a question, just a statement.
Well, and if I may comment, thank you, Rosemary, for your follow-up. And I know there were 3 things that Rosemary wanted me to follow up with the sheriff's office, and we've already addressed the what we're doing at the jail regarding the COVID-19 concerns. The other one was this matter that she just brought up. And as I indicated to Rosemary in an email exchange, I did ask specific questions of the sheriff's office. I've not yet heard back, but maybe the best thing is to ask for information from Lieutenant Schaefer on this issue. Rosemary, is it your understanding that currently, in terms of civil matters like child welfare cases, it is not guaranteed that folks could participate via phone call?
Hey, Rosemary, I just gave you, if you have the ability, I gave you the opportunity to speak. You just have to unmute yourself. Oh, it looks like you got it. Hi, Rosemary.
Hi,
Hi,
Michelle.
Rosemary.
Hi,
Hello,
John.
Rosemary. Hello.
So your question again was?
Well, I'm just wondering, is it confirmed that folks who are incarcerated and who may be involved in a child welfare case, that it's not required that they can participate in the civil hearing via telephone, via at least call-in?
Right. It's sort of a shot in the dark whether the guards are available and can provide a phone.
I see.
It's at the bottom of their list of priorities of their jobs. And I understand that. But no, it's not. It's more times not provided.
And you're suggesting, Rosemary, that sometimes it is provided, but it's not a guarantee, and it's depending on how busy folks might be, or in terms of prioritization. Is that correct, Rosemary?
That's correct. And I do have the policy from the jail. Now, this is not. It is only with the sheriff who seems to be making the decision about. It's not
Yes.
the judges or lawyers involved in cases. They can request an inmate be transported, but
I see.
that rarely happens.
Okay.
So,
No, yes, I'm sorry.
okay. The court services unit is not required to make transports in civil matters, and you must notify your attorney or the courts to make arrangements in these cases. It says you can request special transport. However, you would have to pay for the cost of transportation and any additional deputy presence. So there is a little clause in here under transport, but
Yeah.
so it's really being left up to the sheriff. And I know that detainees, pretrial detainees and inmates who have these cases want to participate. They're not even offered, well, let's take you. And even when their attorneys request that they be allowed to call in, it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So I think something more needs to happen in order to ensure that it could happen.
Understood, Rosemary. Thank you for clarifying, and we'll follow up and see exactly how they're implementing this policy that you just shared with us, and I'm understanding from your work and observations that it's not very consistent, and the idea would be, how do we make it a guarantee, or certainly a standard that is more consistent?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thanks, Rosemary. Okay, Commissioner, we're at the point where we don't have any questions currently, and I don't see any hands up. So
Is it
if you had
possible? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
if you had a special update you wanted to give that maybe you weren't able to talk about, this might be the right time while people are still thinking through some other questions they might have.
Well, and again, yes, I could speak to something here that I would like to share, and hopefully folks are finding this helpful, and do the best I can to answer your questions. and then really keep in mind that I had hoped today we could devote some time to, folks checking in. How are you doing, with all that's going on in the world and on so many levels, right? How is your business doing? How is your family doing? As much as you're comfortable sharing, I think, we're all in this together. We've said that time and time again, and I know there are issues with that, but I hope folks will feel comfortable sharing a little bit, maybe in general, how they're doing. And maybe because there are no questions folks are thinking, or I'm just boring the heck out of people. But I will share one other thing that's I think is very positive, and it's what the county is doing to look into the future. And obviously, we've been responding to all of this public health stuff that's been going on. And as I said earlier, I think overall we've had great success. We have had 27 people die from COVID-19. Mostly those are older adults. And we can't, that's part of the reality that we are dealing with. But what we've put in place is, the idea of how do we move, the next 4 months and the next 6 months in terms of a long-term recovery. And so we have brought on a person who has a lot of experience with recovery from natural disasters, Laura Levy. She is our recovery manager, and she is working through United Way of Larimer County. Larimer County, the government, we've provided some dollars and some resources, but essentially she and others have created this idea of a Larimer County Recovery Collaborative, a framework. And the overarching themes are recovery and resiliency. We're working closely with the business community. There's a wonderful website, if you're not familiar, nocorecoversnow.org. And so we're working closely with the business folks, the chambers, the healthcare providers, and all of that. But in this framework, we have identified 4 areas, and let me share those with you. Within each of those areas, there are subgroups or perhaps task forces, and this would be something that opportunities for folks to help, to engage, to provide input from the community about these different areas. So the advisory groups relate to, number 1, housing and human services. Secondly, government, education, and policy. Thirdly, workforce, small business, and economic development. And the 4th area is community support services. And in addition to recovery and resiliency, we're also looking at some values or principles related to equity, stability, connectedness, and certainly resilience. For example, with housing and human services, and that's the one that I'm interfacing with, we have our Director of Human and Economic Health in that service area, Laura Walker, which is who's also involved in all of this, helping to facilitate that process. But within housing and human services, for example, some of the areas that we've identified where we could use your input and your ideas are food and essential needs, early learning and childcare services, housing stability and homelessness, aging adult service task force. So we're trying to set up these task forces in relation to these 4 areas. And just as one other example, with the workforce, small business, and economic development area advisory group, we have economic development, small business support, nonprofit support, workforce and employment, hospitality, visitor experience, and outdoor recreation, and certainly agriculture and farming. So I wanted to share this with folks. I think this is, we've done this before, not dealing with a pandemic, a public health emergency, but the idea is 4 months from now, 6 months from now, how do we put things in place so that we're on the road to greater stabilization, recovery, and certainly resiliency, and what are the lessons learned from the last 100 days, and certainly moving forward. I don't know if anyone finds that of interest, or if folks have questions in relation to what I just shared.
So, Commissioner, one thing, we have one question, but one thing before that, the
Yes.
website is nocorecovers.com.
Oh, what did I say now? Yeah,
Yeah, you did.
I appreciate you.
Looking for it, nocorecovers.com.
Thank you.
And actually, I'm going to put a link to it. It looks like Hal has a question. I'm actually going to put a link to nocorecovers.com in the answer to Hal's question, because that seems like the best place to put it. But Hal's asking if the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition is included in the group, the Recovers group.
That's a very good question, Hal. I don't know the answer to that, but we can make note of that, Michelle. I hope you can, and we can follow up with that suggestion to make sure that not just the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, but there's also the Poudre River Watershed Coalition as well. So thank you for that, Hal.
And so again, thanks, Hal. I put that link in the answer to Hal's question, but we'll follow up on that. We have an open question, not necessarily regarding recovery, but Alan Miller asks, during these unusual times, visitation to Laurie State Park has reached numbers unseen in the past. This has created massive parking problems on Lodgepole Drive. Are you aware of this, and what can be done?
Well, I know that our Department of Natural Resources Director Dalen Figgs and his team are monitoring all of this, and I would imagine they are aware of this. Once again, this is a question where we can follow up with Dalen Figgs to find out exactly what they're doing about this situation. I would offer two other examples where we've done our best to be responsive. And actually on that street, that road, Lodgepole Pine Drive, one of the issues that was brought to our attention by someone, I think in Bellevue, was that there was a food truck parked in a location right off the road that was created, I think right by the North Dam there, that was creating some concerns about safety, and people parking on one side of the road and running across the street to get I think cookies and other sweet things, which these days comfort food is a good thing, and so that was brought to our attention, and to the credit of our code compliance folks, we didn't go out there. We checked to make sure what property they were on, all the various things, but we didn't go out there with the intention of shutting this food truck business down that's connected to a business in Fort Collins. But we did work with that business owner to find a safer location. So that's an example of a response. And then I know that this was early on when we went from stay at home to safer at home. There were really, really big issues, Alan, at the Eagle's Nest open space area, off of the Red Feather Lakes Road. We had gotten reports similar. The parking lot was totally packed. People weren't practicing the physical distancing. Cars were out on the road, that dirt road there. And we brought this to the attention of the Department of Natural Resources folks and the Parks and Open Space folks. And what we did there is, number one, we stepped up our patrolling as best as we can. We have limited, capacity to monitor all this, but we did step that up, and we also improved the signage. And I would imagine if we haven't already done that, those are some things we can do to address this concern about, folks accessing Laurie State Park and, the Horsetooth Reservoir there. If I may, Michelle, just to go back to, I think what Hal was saying about the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition, and people might find this of interest, but in the one of the third area that there are 4 areas going back to the recovery collaborative framework: government, education, and policy. And within that area, the topics are climate smart. Been working on this climate smart initiative, higher education, pre through K through 12, educational systems, infrastructure and transportation, county operations and program. So that, in my mind, there would be a place for the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition and other coalitions similar to participate in the, for example, in the climate smart framework discussions as we move forward. So I just would offer that. And even, one of the things that came up, if I may, from a recent meeting that I participated in last week with folks who live out at the Hickory Mobile Home Park. As it turns out, as you can imagine, people that are living in manufactured housing communities or mobile home parks, the issue of access to high-speed internet and broadband, there are gaps for lots of reasons. And so Poudre Valley Mobile Home Park, Park Lane, which is just on the county side in the Mulberry corridor, Hickory Village there. We talked about the school district tried to provide mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, but they are limited in their efficacy. And I think kids who would be using that to do homework or to try to study, you could do it for 30-minute blocks of time. So out of that conversation, ideas did come up, in terms of possible collaborations with the city and the county on how can we create more long-term solutions, by getting broadband, connectivity there. And especially when we are aware that the school district, when we come back in August, it looks like they're going to go with, 2 days of online learning, 2 days in the classroom, and 1 day where teachers can, work on the work that they need to do. So we really need to make sure that kids are not disproportionately put at a disadvantage in terms of their learning. We also know that since the schools have gone to online learning, some kids are more adaptable to that than others, families, lots of issues there. But since spring break, we know that there's been impacts on children's learning, and we need to make sure that we're addressing that moving forward.
Commissioner, your question or your answer brought up another question from the audience. What's the status on the broadband project?
Well, we still have the program manager, Pam, who's working on it. One of the things that we're doing that's concrete is, and I haven't talked to them recently, but the timeline was that this summer and into the fall, we would be conducting what are called speed tests. Communities, neighborhoods, individual households that are willing to participate in this survey, where we can get an accurate assessment based on this methodology in terms of gaps and where there is adequate speed, download and upload speed. So that's one thing that we are working on. And actually a follow-up on my part would be to see if we're actually doing that now in light of some of the delays that have occurred. We're also looking at potential collaborations and looking at how we could eventually draw down federal dollars. There's, even before the COVID-19 and the CARES Act funding, there were many millions of dollars available through things like the USDA Rural Development and the Reconnect programs to help fund and leverage local resources to do broadband. And our goal, and that's part of our strategic plan, is to make sure that everyone in the county has access to high-speed internet and broadband.
All right, Commissioner, Hal eventually wants you to call him about that. So just,
Yeah.
This question is related to what we were talking about, so I'm going to go here next. The
Okay.
rural, this is from Alan. I'm going to mess up his last name. Barcelou?
Oh, Braslow.
Braslow. Sorry, Alan, for that. The rural digital divide is a real barrier for many students in particular. All our education plans rely heavily on internet connectivity. Must we not provide this for free to all students? That's the question.
Well, I think the short answer is yes. And, you know, when the county has undertaken an analysis over the last couple of years, and they've looked at, you know, different roles for Larimer County in, you know, helping to fill the gaps, you know, where there are gaps. I think we've determined preliminarily that there maybe 25% of the county, you know, there's not good access to high-speed internet. And as you might imagine, Alan and others, excuse me, a lot of those gaps exist in rural areas. I think one financial model, if the county were, well, first of all, you know, the county taking on the delivery of internet services similar to what the city of Fort Collins has done, at this point is not in the cards. But we have looked at different scenarios. And right now, what we see our role as being a facilitator and drawing down funds and figuring out, you know, as an example, Alan, we've been in discussions with Poudre Valley Rural Electric Association, Poudre Valley REA, and, you know, they have a lot of, along their electric lines, they've installed fiber optic lines, but they're not turned on. I guess there's dark and light fiber optic, and this is out to some of the more remote areas. You know, an example of a partnership would be, you know, how do we get that infrastructure that's already in the ground lit up, and then, you know, create that last mile where it gets to people's homes or farms or neighborhoods. So your point is well taken, the digital divide. We need to make sure that especially kids in rural areas do have access to high-speed internet. When we were having these discussions a couple of months ago about the mobile Wi-Fi hotspots, I asked the school district folks, because we meet once or twice, once a month or once every 2 months with the city and the school district. I asked, well, what are we doing to provide high-speed internet, or even if it's temporary, to kids that are going to school up at Stove Prairie, in Livermore, up at Red Feather Lakes, and they're aware of that, and they have tried to get some of these, you know, these mobile hotspots out to those locations. Your point is well taken, and we need to, you know, we need to resolve these issues. We need to solve these problems.
All right, Commissioner, next question, changing subject, from Rosemary, regarding the Board of Social Services and quarterly meeting reports. The question is, why did DHS stop providing complaints received from clients' customers? Thank you.
Thank you for your due diligence, Rosemary. I know that when you raised a similar question about the quarterly, you know, the meetings, first of all, to back up a bit, the way the statute is set up, the state law, the county, and it's still referred to as the Board of Social Services, even though we have our Department of Human Services. But the local Board of Social Services are the three of us, the county commissioners. And on a quarterly basis, Heather O'Hare and some of her team provide us, you know, with updates, and they show us these infographics, these CSTAT data information. It's a way of looking at certain indicators and seeing where we fit, you know, how well we're doing with achieving the goals that we've set forth. We get that information, and when I asked this question, I understood, if I remember right, that we were going to make sure to start posting that, because I don't know if that's been posted. Your questions are about complaints, and I don't know the answer. I would say that falls into the category of following up with why we're not posting the complaints. There might be some issues with confidentiality, depending on what kind of information is provided in those complaints. But I can check in with Heather and Michelle, make sure I can follow up on all these things, please.
All right, so it's looking like we have no questions and nobody's hand is raised. Oh, yep, Rosemary says thank you.
Thanks. And, you know, I guess folks have heard this from me over the years, and maybe you get tired of hearing it. Once again, we're in pretty intense and emotional times, and we need to take appropriate action to fix very serious problems. Certainly what's been happening in the last 3 weeks regarding the racial strife that has come to the forefront once again. And you know, I actually wrote a column, and you should watch for that. I think it just showed up in the Loveland Reporter Herald. It's in the Estes Park Trail Gazette, and I imagine it'll be in the Colorado and in the North 40 at some point soon. But the title of my piece that I wrote is the idea of unity, compassion, and action. And so when you see that, it'll be, I'm sure I'll get some feedback. But all that said, like when Rosemary said, thank you, or you're welcome, I just hope that we don't totally abandon the importance of civility and agreeing to disagree, and figuring out where we can agree, and you know, solving problems. So I know that gets old after hearing that from me for 40 years, but I'm going to still stick by it. And it seems like I'm coming across low energy. I'm not sure why that is. I don't mean to convey that, but I suppose I'm a little tired. And these meetings are very useful. I hope you find them useful, but I really hope to see people in person sooner than later.
I agree with that, Commissioner. Kevin Jones does have his hand raised. So Kevin, you're gonna have to unmute yourself now, and you are good to go.
Hi, John. How you doing?
I'm okay, Kevin. Nice to hear your voice. I can't see your face, but nice to hear your voice.
I can see your face, and it looks great.
Well, I can. We can take that off if you want me to. No, just kidding.
Hey, just a real specific question. In the meeting the other night with in the county and the Fort Collins City Council,
yeah,
the number was put out in one of the presentations that the number of the amount of truck traffic coming out of the new transfer station would be on the average 30 to 40 trucks a day. Is that correct? Did I understand that correct?
So what Kevin is referring to is there was a publicly posted meeting, virtual meeting on Thursday night between county folks, including the 3 commissioners, and city council folks, and the topics ranged from, well, they were mostly focused on the solid waste facility, the landfill. And I'll get to your question, Kevin, but I think it's important to provide a little bit of context here. So, I mean, that's another example of a really important project that the county is engaged with the municipalities. And now that we're into the details, it's not as simple as before we were into the details. But folks might probably know that the current landfill, out on Taft Hill there in Trilby, is going to reach its capacity and have to be closed down, I think, by first quarter of 2023, or somewhere in 2023 or so. And so over the last number of years, there's been I think a Northern Colorado Waste Shed Coalition that's come up with a master plan, a solid waste master plan. what Kevin is referring to is that, well, one aspect of that is that we would actually build a new state-of-the-art landfill, or as some like to refer to it, dump, although it's really not going to be that way. But that is, there's a location that the county has identified north of Wellington, off of, I think, County Road 9 up there. And there's timelines, and there is, all this information is online. So the meeting on Thursday was to give an update on that. Part of that is also to, at the current site, as we move forward, on the north end of the current site, just a bit north of where folks can enter to recycle or drop off solid waste. The intent is to build a yard waste composting facility, state of the art. And that's some of the discussions that are happening right now. That's on the north end. The truck traffic thing on the south end off of Trilby, there would be built a, quote, state-of-the-art transfer station where trucks and individuals could bring material, and then that would be transported up to the new site. And I do believe Lou Perez mentioned that the potential truck traffic could be 30 to 50 trucks a day. I can certainly follow up on that with Lou and Lori Cadrich, but that did come up. And it's also important for folks to know that this solid waste management master plan, moving forward, we are, in terms of how we're going to pay for this, I mean, there's still cost sharing agreements that need to be worked out, but ultimately over the years, we've been able to save money, if you can believe that government can do that. And it's a lot of it's based on the fees that are charged when folks bring stuff, or the companies bring stuff, solid waste. But that money is in place, and this has been thought out pretty carefully. New landfill, a transfer station, state of the art. First phase is yard waste composting, where folks could bring yard waste, or through the various trash companies. Beyond that, we would look at food waste composting, but that would come subsequent to putting in place the yard waste. The other piece that we talked about on Thursday night, which is really important for folks to know and would welcome your input on this, is the behavioral health facility. Remember that the voters passed the Behavioral Health Initiative county sales tax, 0.25% that would go towards behavioral health issues over the next 20 years. One aspect of that, in addition to the community-based approaches and the grants that are made available to groups, is building a behavioral health facility that would serve as a detox and also as a crisis stabilization facility, inpatient beds, eventually an adolescent center, and so on and so forth. The site that was located, which has generated some spirited discussion, and I'm sure Kevin heard it Thursday night, is in the southeast corner to the east of where the transfer station, it's on the same property that the county owns in relation to the landfill. So that was part of the update, and the other pieces of the solid waste, and that was the discussion on Thursday. And I believe Lou did talk about the truck traffic, yes.
So my question actually goes just one step deeper.
Yes.
And that is, I didn't understand. I understood the 30 to 40. I just wanted to confirm that that's what you heard as well, 30 to 40
Yep.
average trips per day. My question is, if I have a business along that route, say somewhere on Trilby or wherever the route is, I can't remember exactly how it gets to I-25, but if I have a business on that route, say Trilby, where there's traffic going both east and west, does 30 to 40 trips mean round trips? The question being, am I going to have 30 to 40 trucks going past my business in either direction a day, or is it 60 to 80 trucks going past? And so you probably don't know the answer to that right now, but in your, if you, as you move ahead, I would love to try to get an answer for that question. Basically, if I'm a business, how many trucks am I going to have going in either direction, say on Trilby, east or west?
Yes, duly noted, Kevin. It's a very valid, important question, and we'll add that to the list of follow-up items. And I could have Lou or maybe Lori Kadrich get back in touch with you with more details.
Perfect. That'd be great. Thanks, John.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, Commissioner, I'm not seeing any other questions, and I don't see any hands raised right now.
Well, I guess we can begin to close out this session. I'll just say, first of all, thank you to folks who, take up their valuable time on a Saturday. I appreciate Michelle helping be the virtual host. Always does an amazing job, and she had to be trained and brought up to speed on how to do this, so we wouldn't have to rely as much on our really amazing IT folks. So I appreciate Michelle. I appreciate all of you that have participated. I think you all know my email address if there's follow-up that you want to do. There were at least a half a dozen or more things that I wasn't taking notes this time. Michelle is doing that, but we will. Yeah, we'll get back in touch. And as I said, if Hal is still on, as I said, I will, Hal Braden, I will get back to you after this with your questions, and especially the sheriff-related questions, which I've not been able to respond to.
Hey, Commissioner, it looks like someone raised their hand. Do you want to take that question?
Sure, especially if it's an easy one. I'll take easy questions. No, just kidding.
Okay, Jeffrey, I'm going to allow you to talk, so you are only allowed to ask easy questions, but you got to mute yourself.
Jeffrey, I'm just kidding. We got to lighten this up a little bit, I suppose.
I'm sorry to. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeffrey. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jeff Pace, Fort Collins. I'm sorry I'm joining you late, and I probably missed a lot of the content.
Yeah.
And I apologize for that. And I'm sorry, this is not an easy question, but
that's okay. I was just kidding.
I just joined, and I look forward to doing more, joining more of these sessions. And I just read your article in the Coloradan today regarding the current racial concern.
Yes.
And you mentioned an epidemic of systemic racism, and I'm shocked to hear that it exists here in Fort Collins, and maybe I've just been sheltered from that sort of thing. I'd like to learn more, and I wish you would kind of tell me where you see systemic racism in our county, is it the police? Is it our schools? Is it our city or county government or housing policy? Where do you see it? And I'm just wondering if we see it, what have we done to address it?
Thank you, Jeff. I certainly appreciate the question. In many ways, in Larimer County, things are different. In part because, if you look at the demographics, I think 1% of the population of Larimer County, which currently is at about 355,000 folks, 1% is identified as African American. I think we're up to about 13% or so of the population that identifies as Hispanic or Latinx. That's one reality that I think is part of the reality of Larimer County. The reference that I made in the column, and I appreciate you reading it, is that is more in reference to nationally and globally, for that matter. I mean, since the inception of this country, there have been, I would submit, there have been issues with structural racism, discrimination, bias. How that, and at the local level, maybe we don't see examples like we see in other parts of the country, but if you look at today's Coloradoan, this is another example where this idea of implicit bias or the nature of this level of discrimination is not isolated, but it is part of our structural construct. But there was an article, I think, that some student posted homophobic and discriminatory or racist posts on one of those platforms, Instagram or I don't know, all of these things. And Jeff, I offer that, I mean, that's happened on quite over the last few years on a number of occasions at CSU. Another example, I suppose, would be, the Islamic Center on Lake Street there. And there are neighbors, but there was an incident a couple of years ago where someone who was caught and, that working with that person, broke through the windows and I mean, basically did, some things that were not appropriate. So there are examples as far as our law enforcement folks. Hopefully you read that part where I said it's not helpful if we stereotype or generalize all law enforcement as bad cops. That the ones that I've come to know in my role as county commissioner or someone who's been in this community for almost 45 years, I find them to be I've always found them to be decent folks, public servants.
I did notice that, yes.
Well, yeah, and and also I did put in there, Jeff, that I did make a request to the sheriff because I wanted to, it's easy to throw stones at each other, and lay blame. But I think we all have shared responsibility in where we find ourselves in this country at this time, and even in Larimer County. But before we condemn Larimer County deputies and so forth, I think it's important to find out, so what are we actually doing now that is helping? And I've asked the sheriff to provide me with some details about, what kind of training do deputies receive as far as anti-bias training? What are our hiring practices where we can perhaps make it easier, incentivize hiring personnel, deputies, and others that are perhaps more reflective of the communities we serve. And, just one other example I'll offer, Jeff, is, and this is well before the last few weeks and all the stuff that's going on. Last year, the commissioners, we approved the budget item for the sheriff's office to pay for and equip deputies that are out on patrol and I think some other folks with body-worn cameras. And those folks are being equipped as we speak. So there's an example where I would submit that we're being proactive as far as investing the dollars to have the body-worn cameras, and I think includes dashboard cameras, and then the incredible expense of data storage and having that that information available. So that's my response, Jeff.
Oh, I appreciate it. I just became concerned when I see, and the city manager of Fort Collins made a similar comments that seemed to imply a level of systemic racism I just don't see here, and therefore it worries me that we will make judgments or institute policies based on facts that don't exist. I'll give you another example. Also in today's Coloradoan is an article regarding some suggestion that the Poudre School District should institute policies that deny enrollment to children who commit racist acts. Well, racist acts are reprehensible. We all know that, but it's just, I don't know. It seems disturbing that we would even consider a punishment or penalty for non-criminal offenses by children who maybe just don't know what they're doing. But anyway, that's just a thought.
No, Jeff, gosh, and this is an important conversation, and I'm glad you're bringing this up, and as elected officials, and even when I was in the legislature, we don't always succeed, but we have to really try to make policy changes based on facts on the ground, based on people's stories, based on public sentiment, all of those considerations. And so I wasn't aware of this article regarding some suggestions of not enrolling students or something like that have made.
I had that wrong. It was in the North 40 News.
Gotcha. Thanks, Jeff. I'll take a look at that. And so I wasn't aware of that. But I think that sometimes, whether it's school board members or county commissioners or state legislators, et cetera, our responsibility is to try to make informed decisions. And I know that one of the pushbacks, based on all that's been happening in the last 3 weeks, people showed up at the last school board meeting last Tuesday, I think, and they were saying, take the school resource officers out of the schools. A bunch of them are Fort Collins, police officers. A bunch of them in the outside of the city are Larimer County deputies, and so that I would submit to the credit of the school board, they delayed that. In other words, allowing more time, in my opinion, for needed deliberation and thoughtfulness on that issue. What are the pros and cons? And the last thing if I may, Jeff, to say on this issue of systemic racism in Larimer County and the level, respectfully, I offer that those of us who are not in one of these categories, a lot of this stuff that happens in Larimer County, based on anecdotal, based on my relationships with folks who live in mobile home parks, for example, that are predominantly Hispanic people. A lot of times these things that occur are not obvious. They're hidden. But if you can talk with all manner of folks, people of color, and they can cite many examples, even in Fort Collins, even in Larimer County, where these things occur. Thank goodness it's not at the level of some of the big cities and all that, but they do occur, and sometimes they're hidden. And I think sometimes those of us who are in places of advantage or privilege, it's harder for us to notice these things, but I would submit that they're out there.
Well, thank you for your comments.
You're welcome, sir. Well, I think I'm glad that came up. I appreciate Jeff bringing that up.
Yeah, Commissioner, just a couple comments that I don't necessarily think will probably need responses, but I want to get them out there since they were stated. Okay. Alan said, racism is present here as elsewhere, but our demographics, racism is present here as elsewhere. By our demographics, it might be more subtle than we should ask ourselves why we have such demographics.
Yes, I think it somewhat reinforces the points I was trying to make, and I'm sure there are lots of reasons. I mean, CSU has made great progress in diversifying its student body, and that's one of their priorities. So there's an example where a local institution is doing the best they can to make sure that we are recruiting qualified students that come from different backgrounds.
And then final comment here, and I think this is in regards to the body-worn cameras. Storage isn't the problem. Who is going to look at all the recorded stuff? That came from Hal.
Well, and just real quick on that, I know you told me I shouldn't respond, Michelle, or suggested. I'm sure Hal's aware if he's not. So the legislature just passed a bill that I think is going to go to the governor, Senate Bill 217, and it's pretty far-reaching regarding law enforcement related issues. And one of the areas that it covers is the cameras. We're already doing it, but it's going to require, I think, with some limitation, that all the police forces have these cameras. There are going to be costs associated. But one of the issues is around storage. And then the other issue, and I think they have amended this in the bill, is how and when do you make this, this data available, this video data available to folks who request it? So I think those are some of the things we're going to have to work through.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. So before you give your final comments, I just wanted to let everyone know we do always post these meetings up on our YouTube site. So it takes a little while for the video to process and get it up there, but it's usually up there within a few hours to 24 at the most. So I'll say thank you for being here today, and I'll let Commissioner Kefalas take us out.
Well, I think I've already started that process, but again, to say thank you, the next one of these that we'll do, and it's kind of targeting folks up in Red Feather Lakes. I think that's scheduled for the normal time, I believe, June 25th, which is a Thursday. So if folks want to get another opportunity to participate and ask questions, please do. In July, we're looking at some dates. We'll likely have 3 of these in July. I think the first one will probably be July 2nd, which is probably confirmed, and that would be the Wellington. I think we've tried to consolidate these things, so that one would be targeting folks who live in Wellington, Waverly, and Buckeye, but especially folks who might be interested in law enforcement related issues. I have invited, and actually that person stepped forward, one of the deputies at the courthouse, to this next meeting. So we may have some law enforcement folks there who can, update people on issues that matter, and also respond to questions. Other than that, I wish you all well. Please be safe. Hopefully you can be with family and friends at least part of the time during this nice weekend. And I'm going to get out in my garden, and pretty soon after I respond to Hal, and keep weeding. That seems like that's emails and weeding. They kind of go in. No, but that's kind of a silly analogy. So I take that back. But I do spend a lot of time weeding, and I do the best I can to keep up with emails and correspondence. Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Michelle.